An urgent new warning for anyone who vapes.
Health officials sending an urgent warning.
Another warning about the dangers of e-cigarettes.
It seems as if every week brings a major news story about how vaping is really, really, really bad for you. But only a few years ago, electronic cigarettes were hailed as a new and healthier way for people to consume nicotine and pot, and the number of vapers worldwide has grown sevenfold since 2011 to an estimated 41 million users.
We're doing the Juul Hotbox Insane Nick Buzz Challenge.
But now vaping is being attacked as a dangerous trend that's luring teenagers into a deadly habit that's as bad as traditional smoking.
They say it is more addictive than cigarettes.
Vaping drugs is so discreet, teens can do it right in school.
This is a public health disaster.
Reports on vaping-related deaths and respiratory illnesses appear daily on cable news shows, in newspapers, and online. The FDA is considering a ban on flavored e-cigarettes, and many states have already instituted strict regulations on vaping sales and use. Congress has voted to change the age for legal tobacco and e-cigarette sales to 21.
People are dying. Children have died, people have died.
We act quick when there's Ebola and flu epidemics. We've got to act quick with these cigarettes.
Is vaping bad for you? Should we be panicking? What sorts of policies should govern the use of electronic cigarettes for nicotine and for marijuana? To answer these and other questions, I sat down with Reason senior editor Jacob Sullum, who has written extensively and authoritatively about the issue for years.
Do you think it qualifies as a kind of moral or healthcare panic? So
it is it's a panic in two ways. One, that people are implying that legal nicotine e-cigarettes might just kill you, when in fact, if you're a smoker, they might just save your life. Is the real, the reasonable way to look at the issue. And the other thing is that people are panicking about teenage vaping, which I would say is cause for concern. But I don't think it's something to panic about. I don't think it's something to, certainly not a reason to ban products that ought to be available to adults who would like to use them as a safer source of nicotine.
The FDA won't tolerate a whole generation of young people becoming addicted to nicotine.
We could really addict a new generation of kids.
A new generation of nicotine addicts.
And part of the panic over teen vaping started before these respiratory illnesses or deaths attributed to vaping.
Yes.
And so let's talk about that for a second. Why are people worried about teens vaping?
The most serious concern, I think, would be if you imagine that some teenagers who would never use a tobacco product, because e-cigarettes are available, will get introduced to nicotine, will get hooked on nicotine, and then eventually move on to smoking. That would be bad. There's very little evidence that anything like that is happening. In fact, as the popularity of e-cigarettes took off among teenagers and young adults, not only has the downward trend in smoking in those groups continued, but it's actually accelerated. And so even though they may say that, it's like 28% of high school students are current vapers, that means past month. If you say, who is vaping on a daily basis, right? It's about 6%. So that's a significant phenomenon, but it's not a whole generation getting addicted to nicotine, which is a phrase you will often hear. And furthermore, if you dig into the data and look, who are these people? The vast majority of people who are vaping daily are people who also have smoked.
E-cigarettes are a gateway to traditional cigarettes.
A gateway to smoking.
Looks like it is a gateway.
So it doesn't look like vaping is serving as a gateway to smoking. It looks like vaping is serving as a substitute for smoking.
And certainly you hear a lot of anecdotal reports, at least, of adults saying, I couldn't stop smoking until vaping, and now I don't smoke and I don't even really vape anymore. Is it accurate to say that a lot of people, or how many people, are using vaping as a way to get off of regular cigarettes?
Well, there are a few million Americans who used to smoke and now vape. So we know that. We know from clinical research where they do a randomized trial that using e-cigarettes to quit smoking is about twice as effective as using conventional nicotine substitutes like nicotine patches, nicotine gum, that sort of thing. And we also know that it's far less dangerous than smoking.
But e-cigarettes are not an FDA-approved method to quit smoking.
You're going to burn a liquid and inhale it into your lungs.
First of all, it doesn't contain tobacco. It doesn't burn anything. So the fact that you're not inhaling smoke makes a huge difference. They've measured levels of various potentially hazardous chemicals in the bloodstreams of vapers versus smokers, and they find that the levels in vapers are comparable to the levels in people, almost like the levels in people who don't smoke at all.
Do consumers have enough information to make an informed decision?
Well, if by consumers you're referring to smokers who are thinking of switching to e-cigarettes, yes, you definitely have enough information at this point to know that if you make that switch, your risk of developing life-threatening disease will be much, much lower. We don't know all of the potential health risks of vaping because we don't have long-term data. We've only, this is something that's only been around for a decade or so. And so it's possible that there are some risks that are not now recognized, but there's no way that this is going to be anywhere near as dangerous as lighting something on fire and inhaling all the combustion products that come out of that. So for smokers, it's very clear that if they switch to this other source of nicotine, their health risks are going to go way down. We don't want to be discouraging people who are current smokers from considering this alternative or making it harder for them to find those products. And even among teenagers, as I was saying, if you're talking about teenagers who are now vaping, who otherwise would be smoking, it's better that they're vaping. I mean, if you look at the historical data on smoking among teenagers, the levels have never been lower.
They're coming home and they're saying, Mom, I want to vape.
In response to increases in teenage vaping, the FDA has sought to ban flavored e-cigarettes. But after pushback from vapers and the industry, President Trump appeared to backtrack last month.
They were, spooked by the politics of this and the pushback.
Still, starting in 2020, all vaping products, including those currently on the market, must go through an application for FDA approval.
So this is a very expensive process. I mean, there's a debate about exactly how much it's going to cost, but even the FDA says it's in hundreds of thousands of dollars per application. So if you're a company, especially if you're a small company, a mom and pop operation that is producing dozens of different flavors, you need to apply for approval of each of those flavors. And it's not clear exactly what you have to do to get the FDA's approval. The standard is they have to decide whether this is good for public health or not.
So it's not enough to simply show that it's safe.
I don't want to say safe. We should always say safe or less hazardous because nothing is 100% safe, but definitely much less hazardous than conventional cigarettes, which of course are continue to be available. That's not enough because the FDA also will look at who might start vaping who otherwise never would have used a tobacco product, including teenagers as well as adults. Might some of those people then move on to use tobacco products? What about people who might have quit smoking except they started vaping when they couldn't smoke and now they're continuing a habit they otherwise would have quit? You can't really project all of that, but they're supposed to pretend to project that, and they're supposed to be demanding evidence on points like those from these manufacturers. A big company like Juul, which is partly owned by Altria now, they can definitely afford to go through this process and get their products approved. The vast majority of companies are not going to be able to afford it. Some of them may only be able to afford it for a few of what they are now offering. So basically, the market is going to look much different. It's going to wipe out a lot of the competition, a lot of the variety. And that's a shame because
artisanal vaping is probably going to be a thing of the past.
Well,
and this industry went from zero to where it is now. It's billions of dollars, and a lot of that is like small producers, right?
Yes, I mean you have in any town of significant size, you've got vape shops where they not only sell the devices, but they also sell the e-liquid that goes in the devices, and they very often concoct it there. They will make it to order. They will combine the flavors you want with the nicotine concentration you want. That will be basically impossible. You're not going to have small businesses that can meet this regulatory burden. So they're going to go out of business. And the same threat, of course, comes from if you ban e-cigarette flavors, you are banning the products that former smokers overwhelmingly prefer.
Mango, root beer float, strawberry cheesecake,
cotton candy, or like gummy bear.
They don't have enough redeeming public health value given all the youth used to remain on the market.
Everybody says, oh, these are clearly designed to lure teenagers because of the fruity and flavors and the candy flavors and the dessert flavors. And it's true that those do appeal to teenagers. No question, but they also appeal to adults. It's very clear that those are the flavors that people who have quit smoking overwhelmingly prefer. So you're wiping out the vast majority of the market by banning those flavors. And it doesn't make sense if your concern is smoking-related disease and death, because inevitably a lot of these people who have quit smoking are going to go back to smoking once the products they prefer are no longer legally available. And a lot of people who might have switched will now be less likely to to try out e-cigarettes if all they can get is the tobacco flavor, which is terrible, by the way. I know the tobacco flavors, it's a matter of taste, obviously, but overwhelmingly the smokers are trying to get away from this flavor that they associate with their former habit, and which makes a kind of psychological sense. And they should have those options.
There is a major break tonight in the nationwide vaping crisis.
Rising concerns about teenage vaping reached a head this past summer, just as a new vaping-related controversy erupted.
An outbreak of e-cigarette or vaping-related injuries and death.
The expanding epidemic tied to vaping.
The current crisis may be only the beginning.
The CDC began receiving reports of mysterious vaping-linked lung illness from around the country, ultimately identifying over 2,500 cases that have led to over 50 deaths.
Some of them involve nicotine, some marijuana, some both.
But contrary to much of the media coverage, Solom says the people who got sick overwhelmingly used illegal cannabis vapes, not legal nicotine vapes.
How do you get that? Basically off the streets, I guess, off like a drug dealer.
A recent study of patients in Minnesota bolstered this view.
They interviewed a bunch of them and said, what products did you use? And they found that overwhelmingly they were using THC products, not nicotine products. Now, even the people who say, I never vaped anything but nicotine, first of all, they may not know what they actually vaped. If they're using black market products, they may not know what those products contained. Secondly, they may not be telling the truth because they may be reluctant to admit that they used an illegal drug. And we know from some of the research that some of the people who don't report vaping THC test positive for THC. Right. So clearly there's some underreporting. So it could very well be the case that these conditions are entirely attributable to black market cannabis products.
When you say black market cannabis products, you're not talking about you can go to places like California or Colorado, Nevada, and buy legal THC vaping products. So you're not talking about the ones that you would get at a dispensary.
Right. There have been a couple of cases in Oregon where lung injuries were associated with the purchase of products from a state licensed source. And there is some evidence that some licensed manufacturers were producing THC vapes that included vitamin E acetate, which is the main, at this point, the main chemical of concern. This is a substance that both allows you to dilute your vaping solution and to thicken it at the same time. So it doesn't look like it's been diluted and it looks more like what people are expecting.
The vast majority of cannabis vapes containing vitamin E acetate were sold on the black market, as word spread among sellers that they could use the additive to boost their profits.
It seems like it's something in the last 6 months or so. So it's something new. There's been vaping going on for a long time.
In the same Minnesota study, the authors found that no THC products seized by the police in 2018 contained vitamin E acetate, but all of those seized in 2019 did.
When they test lung fluid from these patients, they consistently find vitamin E acetate. That is the most likely culprit at this point. There could be other toxins, it could be contaminants or things people deliberately add in some of these I say black market products because you have no control, you have no quality control, and you don't know what you're getting. That's the crucial issue. So to the extent that they respond to this problem by the government's, states or the federal government respond by banning products, it only makes things worse because you're pushing people to use these black market vapes where you don't know what you're getting and you don't know what's in them.
As federal health officials and lawmakers were pushing bans in response to the alleged teenage nicotine vaping crisis, the outbreak of cannabis-related vaping illness hit. State officials saw their opportunity to respond forcefully to both perceived crises and decided to target the entire vaping industry, not just sellers of the illicit THC vapes that likely caused the outbreak.
Snuffing out an epidemic.
Michigan becoming the first state to ban the sale of flavored e-cigarettes.
A bunch of states imposed emergency bans. These are unilateral bans that are imposed by the executive branch, by the governor. And typically what they have done is banned flavored vaping products. In Massachusetts, they impose a total ban on vaping products, including marijuana, which is legal there now. And so it doesn't make sense in the sense that if people really like vaping and now you've made the legal, THC vapes, no longer available, they're going to be more inclined to use the black market product, which is the source of the problem. But at least they're not, just going after flavored, nicotine e-cigarettes and pretending that this is doing something about these lung injuries, because it has nothing to, as far as we can tell, it has nothing to do. Those products have nothing to do with the lung injuries. So I think in Massachusetts, the state legislature has come in and now they are banning just specifically nicotine vaping products in any flavor except tobacco. But you will once again be able to buy the marijuana, vaping products in whatever flavors they want to offer.
Is there a sense, particularly at the state level, is there evidence that will persuade the regulators to say, you know what, we made a mistake, we're going to let these products go back on the market?
Well, I think as more evidence emerges that implicates these black market THC products in the lung disease outbreak, gradually you will see government agencies acknowledging this reality. The CDC has already changed the advice it is giving. It is emphasizing black market product, in particular black market THC products. Also, conceivably there's a threat from black market nicotine products as well. You don't really know what's in them either. So they are starting to change what they're saying. And one thing that the FDA and CDC have been saying for quite a while now is if you are a smoker who has switched to vaping, don't switch back. Well, that's sound advice, but it's undermined by this panic that you generate by implying that, that Juul might just kill you because of this disease, the lung disease outbreak that actually has nothing to do with products.
What's a preferable regulatory structure?
There should be rules against fraud. You should have to say what's in the product. It should not be so cumbersome to get approval that you wipe out most of the competition and you discourage innovation. Because if every time you change a product, it becomes a new product and you have to submit a new application, that obviously discourages from making products that are more convenient, that are more economical, that are more appealing, that are potentially less dangerous. You can also imagine there are ways to prevent underage use of these products. There's schemes involving apps on your phone that would communicate with your vaping device, and it would prevent anybody except the authenticated owner from using the device. I don't know if that would ever take off, but it's an option you can't even try in the current regulatory environment because it would take so long to get approval for something like that. You want to have a regulatory environment where people know what they're buying, unlike in the black market, and where there's room for competition and innovation, and where the barriers to entry are not so high that only big corporations can participate.